And why did I name
Mm,
my TED Talk Coaching Teams Through Chaos, right? Like 3 years ago, this is everywhere, but really chaos can have many different phases of energy. So
yeah.
even in the chaos, in the turbulence, there can be pause, micropause. Hi, I'm Jennifer Britton, and welcome to the Coaching Many podcast. I've been on a mission for the last 20 years to expand the coaching conversation to many. Along with my co-host, Evana Valle, we're going to be exploring coaching as it relates to conversations, connection, and change in both personal and professional settings. Coaching Many is about creating empowering and thought-provoking spaces for conversation which strengthen relationships and enhance results. Throughout the Coaching Many podcast, we'll share tools, practices, and approaches to support you in your conversations, one dialogue at a time. So, Ivana, we're back. It's been a couple of months actually since we've recorded. Interesting. We're now in winter, well, almost spring of 2025. Lots of change on the go, which really is influencing our topic today, which is about
Mhm.
expanding our range, getting grounded, really being able to show up in that strong coaching mindset. So, what's top of mind for you today?
Yeah, I think this is such an important topic with what is happening around us. And really, yeah, for me, how can we support our coaches, our peers, in how they show up and stay grounded in who they are, but also be present to the needs of their participants or what's at the kitchen table, meeting your people where they are. Because in a world of chaos and in a world of change in the conversation space, I think it's really important that we need to meet people where they are. And how do we do that as a coach, as a leader, as a parental figure, whatever that looks like, tastes like, sounds like?
Yeah, absolutely. It is significant, as I'm calling it, times of radical change that
Yeah.
I don't think most people have seen or are comfortable with, or even understanding what is playing out fast and furious. And so we want to get you thinking today about what are you doing on a couple of levels. One of the things I found myself talking a lot about lately is asking coaches, how are they resourcing themselves? What are they doing to make sure that they have a release valve, that they are
Mhm.
taking a pause? And so in today's episode, we really want to maybe weave together a lot of different threads that maybe you've stumbled across in your connection with us. Maybe you haven't, because I think a lot of this goes right back to reconnecting workspaces.
Mhm.
It came out now 4 years ago. It goes into our whole component of coaching and change and that whole body of work, as well as this is supervision and mentor coaching. And so, really getting you to think about what is needed by you right now to support yourself, but also be of service to your clients and the different
Mhm.
systems that you support. So, I think a great place to start with is looking at ourselves, who are you and what are
Totally.
you leaning into right now? What are the strengths you're leaning into, but what might you also be overcompensating or over
Mhm.
extending? Because in times of change, right? What do? We lean into our strengths, but sometimes maybe too much into our strengths. What does that bring up for you, Ivana, when you think about strengths and compensation?
Yeah, for me, it's really around that sensitivity, that awareness in a space of change. Change can't happen without a pause, without some awareness of like, how am I being in this? But that first step is that slow down. What does my landscape look like? How am I being in this? How am I showing up for myself? What are my needs right now? A lot of the work that I do is around that worthiness. Like I don't position my work in worthiness, but when people are going through change, when people are going through evolution, a lot of times we can get on that hamster wheel and go, go, go and think that we have to do more. And in doing more, we actually lose focus on what's important and who we are.
Yeah. Well, you've just named the first two steps of the reconnecting workspaces, right? Pause, focus, create, and activate. And as Ivana said, we've got to pause. What does a pause look like? How are we pausing? When are we
Mhm.
pausing? Are we making sure that we are pausing? Because I think a lot of coaches are just running and reacting
Yes.
rather than sort of being in that very strategic mindset. This is when strategic thinking, not strategic planning, but strategic thinking actually becomes so critical. And it is about slowing it down so that we can discern, we can sort of, to the word focus, we can look at what is important. So if you're familiar with the superpowers, the coaching superpowers that we've done episodes on in the past, what are you doing to embody more of that grounded labyrinth energy, the being here now, the stillness that is needed to really pause to see what is happening rather than to perhaps be in that catalytic firecracker energy, which is, while it's big and bold, is boldness what's needed right now?
And to further that inquiry is like, that's different for everyone, right? That pause and the space of pause is going to look different for everyone. And I want to just name this. It might look like meditation. It might look like journaling.
Yes.
It might look like fishing, getting out and about,
a walk in the woods.
A walk in the woods, like whatever that is for you. And I think it's really important. That is part of that self-awareness. That is part of that self. What does self need? We're not talking about rejuvenation as much as we're talking about rest, maybe, and pause, which brings rejuvenation, especially in chaos. I think this is a really fundamental piece right now, especially if we look beyond ourselves and we only focus on what's going on in the outside. We can get in that vortex, in that space of more hustle, more rush, more, I have to do even more. And maybe, and I think we have an episode on intentionality, like, what is the intention behind what you're doing? How does that fit into the other things of vision and strengths and that type of stuff? So I know I'm taking the conversation really back broad, but let's.
And I'll anchor it back. Yeah, we do want to have, I'm glad that you brought up the word vision. I think it's about anchoring in values, right? Part of the pause is about identifying what is happening and how does it align with my values? I think one of the things we are seeing in this moment in time are huge paradigm shifts once again, right? Myths and new realities. But how are we naming that? And how are we even noticing that things are shifting? So I want to invite those that are listening to think about that notion of the myths and the realities. What has changed? What is shifting? And which paradigm are you also straddling? Or paradigms, plural, right? Because I think we've gone through so many changes in, say, the last 5 years. Back to 2020, this is another set of changes. Where is it taking us? And I think in the pause, we also want to identify what role do we want to play.
Absolutely.
With this change, it might be a different role than we played before. And so what is important for you? What are you noticing about your resourcing back to range, right? Like, do you want to be activating more of that grounded labyrinth energy? Do you want to be leaning more into, for me, it would be the creative tool master, right? Having that variety of tools to pull upon to facilitate the conversations in the moment, which I'm noticing with my clients are pretty variable, right? Like to the word chaos. And why did I make my TED Talk coaching teams through chaos, right? Like 3 years ago, this is everywhere, but really chaos can have many different phases of energy. So even in the chaos, in the turbulence, there can be pause. Micropause.
Yeah. And I love that bridge because you've taken us from how we want to be and what we need for ourselves through the chaos, through the change, and you've taken us already to start looking at, like, in the conversations we're having, when you talk about what you're noticing in your clients. And I think part of the pause for I'll speak for myself, for me with my clients, is really recognizing where they are, in the conversations I'm having right now, like, people are naming that there's a lot of heaviness.
Yeah.
And so as a coach, as a leader, as a parent, how are you? What is your relationship with that heaviness? So you can be with your coachees, your participants, right? Because it goes back to meeting people where they are. And part of that is how are you in that? So you can meet people where they are and support people through the tools that we have as a coach in time, especially through times of change, in times of chaos. And it makes me think of the Bruce Feller, right? The life quakes, right? The world is experiencing a life quake, similar to 5 years ago with the pandemic. Now it looks different, but how can we support the conversations we really stand for in that space so people can be grounded, so people can be present? How are we being present for competency? How can we maintain that presence for them?
Yeah. And I think as we maintain the presence, right, like any change cycle, there are people who are moving at different paces. Different spaces in the world are at different vantage points as well, right? There's sort of an immediacy for some people in the world right now, and there's not for others. And that's an interesting element of this. So I think depending on where coaches work, they're going to have a variety of conversations playing out every day. There may be instances where change is not even named. And I'll just leave it at that. Because I think for people who are listening, they're like, really? Is this a relevant topic? There will be listeners who are in that. There are other spaces where it's like, this is the topic of the moment.
And depending on who you work with and what what the conversation is in that space is going to be different. But I think what we're touching on is that whole element of group coaching, right? Like group coaching is that individual, like everyone is driving their own bus. And how can we as group coaches hold that space, that tension of, someone needs more gas. Meanwhile, someone needs to actually pause more based on what's going on in their own situation, in their own environment. And that's really, I think, going back to the superpowers, the range as a coach, expanding your ranges. How can you be present and listening for the different needs of the participants in your conversation and meeting each participant where they are, while also still supporting progress, evolution? I say this with my clients, like, I'm your mirror, right? So sometimes I'm the mirror that just needs to hold the space for you to be with so sometimes I'm the mirror that champions you for that when you are in a space of, and sometimes I'm the mirror that just needs to speak what needs to be named to support you in that transformation, in that evolution, in that discovery. So, I think that's really fundamental. And that really comes to life in the group coaching conversation as our range as a coach. How do we play with that? And I think we touch on that in group coaching essentials, and it really comes to life in the pathway programs that we offer at Potentials Realized.
Absolutely. And dialing that in, it's interesting as we see some of our recent graduates, people who've just completed the pathway program, and that understanding of like, ooh, I can really, be intentional, back to intentionality on what sort of energy I'm bringing into the space. In meeting your clients where they're at, there's also another strategic question I've been asking the people that I supervise and mentor coach, which is, what is your role as coach? Are we, I think this is a very strategic question at this moment in time. Like, are we fully neutral? What does it mean to be neutral? Are we not neutral? So we need to examine that in our work and in our relationships, because it will have an influence. And I think with, again, the changes that are on the go, we may be pulled, called, activated by others to stand. That maybe is not coaching stance. So I think we also need to be clear on when we're stepping out of coaching stance and naming that and being okay with it, but being intentional with it. Because we may not be able to do what we can do from the stance of coach. I don't know. That's again an interesting space to be sort of thinking about, reflecting on. And I know when I asked that yesterday in our mentor coaching group, it really activated quite a significant pause on the part of coaches. So
yeah. Interesting. You're activating a few things inside of me as you say that, like that, I'm thinking about that stand, right? Like that stand as a coach is different than me having an agenda, right? And like they're completely different. Like I stand for evolution. I stand for transformation. I stand for supporting our participants in fulfilling the vision that they have. But I stay unattached to what that looks like. Yeah. I stay unattached to the pace that takes, but I still stand for that, and managing our biases and managing our interpretations of what we think they need. Even from, I'm going to say this, even from a group, I'm going to really make this granular, like, because it shows up in group coaching essentials all the time. This whole piece of, I need to have like a structure. I need to have a framework. I need to have know what we're going to be doing. And it's like, no, you need to have an idea. But again, just like one-on-one, like it's holding the client's agenda. And so how can you be with that tension?
Yes.
So you're in service of their goals.
Yeah. And again, I think we want to be intentional. How are we showing up and how are we seeing ourselves in dialogue and in the conversation? So I think it's an interesting time, right? But let's go create the activate through focus, because how are we creating focus and what are we doing to creatively? Like, I think this was what I really enjoyed a few weeks ago when we did the Barbados program, was really look at how do you creatively activate new insight, or how do you creatively put a pause so that people can get grounded and catch their breath and start to connect the dots of their world, which in a group is going to be different from person to person. So that's the challenge for coaches right now who are working with groups. How do you hold the space? Which is why we wanted to do today's topic on your range in times of change. Like, are you able to really hold the space for it all? What do you need to do to resource yourself? And who might you partner with? I think there's a partnering question here.
Absolutely.
So
yeah. And I think we touch on this a little bit, is this whole idea, like, you and I are completely different. And that's part of the magic that we create when we play together. You're the creative tool master, and you really have that strategic and that vision mindset approach to everything that you do. And that's really your genius. And you've really developed your range, and through intentionality, I've witnessed it firsthand, and it's brilliant. And for me, in my range and evolution of a coach really has been like, my secondary superpower is grounded labyrinth. But 10 years ago, when I came into this world, into this profession, absolutely not. And so I want to just name that, and name, like, there is importance in knowing where your strengths are, but also building your range. And having said that, part of what I want to just name is like grounded labyrinth. Like I said, it's not only about meditation, it's about people, coming into presence, and it can be done, I'm going to say, easily. And part of meeting people where they're at in that grounded labyrinth is also reading the space, like the energy, like in that listening of what we can introduce and how we can do it, And I'm going to share like a very simple, we'll say, is that mindfulness, right? Like that mindfulness, helping people connect to their 5 senses on a very basic level, whether it be through reflective prompts, question prompts, or just like giving them a vision and having them, what does that taste like? What does that sound like? What does that look like? What does that feel like? So I think that's at a very basic way. And then there's a lot of grounded labyrinth around breath work and nervous system. And we offer a whole program, Mila, for neuroscience and all that. And then I'm going to let you speak more to that piece, that piece. But there's also the piece, and I just want to name and normalize, is the body, the somatic, as a tool as a resource. And there's a whole like niche in coaching of somatic. And I'm going more there. That's where I want to play. And so I'm leaning into that in building my range. And part of the beauty about the body is, especially in times when there's so much chaos, when there's so much change, it is the vehicle to ground us and to help reconnect us to who we are. And it can be done through a grounding technique. And it can also be, for me, what I'm working with my clients is really accessing the body as a resource for decision making to support the change that we want. And again, it's not when we talk about body, it's not about feeling, it's about connecting people and giving people a place of pause and reconnecting to the sensations, the experiences, allowing voice to the mind, which is part of the body, but also allowing voice to the gut, allowing voice to the sensations. Where do you experience that? Fear, that type of stuff. And it's really important when someone is playing in that space, again, to meet your participants where they are, start slowly, and always offer it as an invitation, not as a, must do, because a lot of people are disconnected.
Yeah, I think there is the moment of being in the moment. What the current change is calling us forward with is so what is next, right? And for some clients, they may not be what is next, but I know my work with leaders right now, they are being pulled, right? They're not being pushed. They're being pulled to step into a new stance around leadership very quickly. And so to the body, right, we also want to look at where are you now, but where do you need to be? Where do you want to be? And so there's a component of how do we help people step into the what's next, into the next iteration, not just being in the now. So that's an interesting, I'm taking us out of grounded labyrinth and taking us into that strategic level. But I think is perhaps making people breathless right now is the pace of change. And so there may not be as much time to pause, even though we need the pause. But now, what is the next, right? If a paradigm is shifting, how are you showing up in the new paradigm?
Yeah.
And that really, I think, rather than coming through the head, comes through the body and helps us, we can start looking at what does that feel like? What do I notice? How do I stand in? And that may be very different, right? I'm very conscious of sort of Gardner's model of how people approach change, the early adopter to the laggard. And it's interesting when I think about what has been in the coaching space for quite some time in the last few years, things like imposter syndrome. What happens to people who are being completely consumed by imposter syndrome in a time of change? That's a really interesting question. That's very different than working with a leader who has to act, who chooses to act. So think about your clients and what they need and what they are grappling with, because I think there's really a range of what is showing
absolutely
in the landscape of coaching and where people are hearing and seeing from their clients what they need. So, and interesting. And we'd invite you, I think, from a resource perspective, if you haven't still done the coaching superpower quiz, check it out. It'll be in the link. We've done other episodes on the superpowers. We do a 14 CCE program that we just wrapped up actually a few weeks ago, last week. And, what people loved about it was just understanding that I have all of these areas that I can access. I don't just have to show up one way. And in fact, as complexity continues to emerge, we need to show it all. We need to embrace it all. And we also need to rest. We also, we can't be on 24/7.
Absolutely.
So I hope people have found today's episode interesting, right? I think for some of you, you might be like, for others, you might be like, this is my work. This is my work. And it was really interesting a few weeks ago in Barbados to see the first of the many conversations around coaching and change, part of the experiential roadshow, right? Like, I think for many of you, now is the time to really be looking at this through the lens of innovation and creativity, because for countries, I'll just say it, Like for countries like Canada, we've got to innovate. We've got to do things differently. Is innovation always part of our DNA? Not necessarily, but we have to innovate in order to thrive. So that's a strong statement. It may not be where everyone is coming from, but how do we innovate in times of complexity? We've got to do it in creative ways. So stay tuned.
And I want to share this, if I may. I want to share this with you in terms of when I hear innovate and how do we innovate, I'm going to just say this, like, it doesn't mean you have to go create your own charms. It means actually tapping into resources like the charms, the conversation sparker charms that you've created. It's like the 90-day dice. It's like how, to keep conversations fresh, to keep conversations. It's feedback that I get all the time in my conversations and in my testimonials is the different resources I use, which really are your resources, Jen, in terms of the journaling prompts, the charms. Like, so when I hear innovate, like, because I don't, for those of you like me who go, ooh, like what? Like, okay. But to me, it's like, how do I bring more diversity in the sense of, in terms of products, expanding conversations, igniting conversation in a way that I can actually bring and expand and catalyze, those conversations. Thank you.
So I'm just picking up one dice right now. Like when you see this, like what's next, right? Or you roll the DNA. Like even in times of change, does our DNA stay the same? Even that question sparks a level of insight, but you don't have to do anything. You just roll the dice, see what comes up. And I think that's what I'm having a lot of fun with because, again, for a lot of coaches, they haven't been coaching in this space of change. This has been my for my entire career. How do you create change? How do you step into change? How do you lead the change? And this is just a different change, complex, yes. And there's always been complexity. I just don't think people have had the exposure to the complexity that maybe we are now all again experiencing. But to the reconnecting workspaces dice, right? Sparking connection in the world of change. We don't have to do it alone. And that's where our tools, the Sparker.
I was going to say the Sparker charms are right behind you on the left, looking at you. It's on the left side. You can even see some of the tints.
I'm going to the post office, regularly. It's, what is interesting as coaching and change and economic factors happen, more and more people are grabbing these tools because I think they want something different. They want to experiment. And some people will say, oh, but does it always work? No, but does a question always work, right? Like, I think we want to also hold any of our tools in that space of unattachment. What might be possible if I bring it in? What might sometimes
and that really does speak to the range, right? That speaks to the range, even for that pause, to allow someone even 2 minutes to look at charms in front of them, to catch their breath, to see how that charm connects to them being present in the conversation, right? It's those micro moments. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And I'm going to say this, it's changed my coaching.
Yeah.
It's changed my coaching. It's changed my conversations.
And I would guess that it's made it easier in some respects, right?
Absolutely. And more enjoyable.
Yeah. And there's always this era or this element of discovery, right? Because you don't know what card is going to get pulled, or you don't know what dice is going to show up, or what charm people select. And that, again, I think to a tool for empowerment, it gives a voice to the client. It's not our voice. It's like, let's see. And I never, this is now going on pretty much daily, every workday since November. So 4 months of the year, every day I've used a different tool for one or more creative processes. And how many times do you think? Like 90% of the times people are like, this is like my day, or this is what I'm thinking about right now. So again, it creates a creative pause so that people can really dig deeper into what is going on. And I think, again, it's an important, back to the doorway notion. We haven't raised it in this, but certainly as part of the coaching and change, looking at those doorways. What is the doorway that you're choosing? what is in front of it and what is like on the other side of the threshold as well.
Yeah.
But we hope you enjoyed it. This is our 30 minutes for today. So listeners, we want to hear from you. What are you noticing? If you have the dice, if you have the Sparker charms, if you have one of our multiple card decks, because actually I was laying them out the other day. We have 6 card decks, right? Over the next 10 years. And this year I'm going to be working on the 6-factor card deck for teams, because again, I think teams continue to need these tools in their own hands. We don't just have to hold them as a coach. These are great gifts. And I've had teams using the dice. They love the dice, and it just activates a little bit of sparkle, I think, in what can seem like all-consuming team meetings.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful.
What do you want to say as we go to wrap up?
I think I've leaned into your products, and I also know that many of you probably have already products that you have. And so my inquiry for you is, how can you bring more intentionality with the tools that you have to create and expand your range of that groundedness, to create that pause, and share that in the messages, right? What are you using to help create pause, right? As a community of coaches and leaders, let's share what we have. Jen, you've got an amazing product offering of so many available, which I continue to lean in on, and there's others. So share that. Let's share that.
And I think that's the piece too that I'm going to be moving more towards, which is, regardless of what you're using, how do you spark these conversations for creativity, for chaos, for change, for groundedness? Because it doesn't matter what we use. It's, what is that conversation about? Which brings us back, 90-day guide, right? Delegation, your relationship, all of these things. So we hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. Do share within your network. And for more on this, check us out, groupcoachingessentials.ca. Also check out the Coaching and Change, and of course, our website at coachingmanypodcast.com. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Final words, Evana?
Just, experiment with what you have that innovative, because I think that's really what's going to support our conversations and what we really stand for as coaches. And so lean in terms of whatever you have. If you don't have, explore what you can have access to, through our website is one option. And look to see how you can expand that and bring pause. Really, it's just like, how can we allow, in a space of so much going on, to support people to have that pause so they can take that next great step, whatever that looks and means for them.
Phenomenal. Well, we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Until we meet again, be well. Take care.
Be well.